The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on Prospero. My name is Derek Krebs, and I'll be hosting today's session, so welcome one and all. Just a few housekeeping items. Everybody is currently on mute, so I'd say please take advantage of the question area there to your right within the GoToWebinar control panel, which you can minimize and maximize to see the attendees of that question area. And also you can maximize or minimize your resolution on screen as needed to see my screen more aptly. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is one of our Prospero webinar in our series. It's a nice little overview application. And I see several attendees, many familiar names and companies. So again, welcome. And a lot of times we'll have audience members, usually from 3 different subsets of members. One might be existing Prospero customers. We thank you for your business as valued customers. Or a second group of audience attendees might be those people that we currently support on the Microsoft stack that are looking to transition or move to Prospero. And third and finally, we have oftentimes partners who might be implementing your ERP that are looking to sell and deploy Prospero. So again, I want to welcome all of you to today's session as I see a few stragglers that came in at the top of the hour. And again, my name is Derek Krebs. I'm a senior consultant with the MSX group, and this slide just is going to be one of just a couple. I'm going to introduce today's topic, but the bulk of the session, we're going to be looking at the application. All right, I've been doing this for about 30 years. A couple of emphases from this slide is as a consultant, meaning I'm not a sales or marketing guy. So really I'm just going to show you efficiencies that Prospero can bring to both your reporting and budgeting and data warehouse abilities. And the fun part of my job these past 30 years is working with hundreds of different customers in all kinds of industries, which really just means Prospero is a very flexible, scalable product to meet any industry and any company size. So always put the product to the test, like that last little bullet point. If later you want, as a prospective buyer, want to see a little one-on-one overview, even we have a free trial version. So we'd love and welcome you to that free trial version of Prospero. And we can take a sampling of your reports and even migrate your FRX and Manager Portal reports into Prospero. That's going to be one differentiator of many within the application in our company MSX group, amongst several. And let me finish off with just the last couple of slides, and we'll have the fun looking at the application. All right, for those of you that might be new to the application, just to emphasize again, it does both reporting, budgeting, and data warehousing. And historically, during the 30 years been doing this, 15 years where you worked at Microsoft, and it was historically 2 separate applications. One on the reporting side, either FRX, later branded as Manager Portal, and then there was a second product of Microsoft Forecaster that was on the budgeting side. So that used to be painful, the old way, 2 applications, double your work. So about 15 years ago, we got spun off from the Microsoft realm. I'm so glad we did. We now have a much more nimble product, meaning new product features functionalities versus those old products are basically getting sunsetted into their grave here. And we have a top-notch consulting, support, and development team to bring, again, new features functionalities to you much sooner and quicker. And you're going to see today some great little reports in budgeting, interactive charts and graphs, drill down to the account and transaction detail. Oh my, just to name a few. And here I'm just going to gloss over this. I probably quoted most on the reporting side, but let me emphasize again that last bullet point. Prospero, along with storing your general ledger data, is also a great data warehouse. So maybe you might have statistics, actual or budget, like for head counts, units sold, margins. The possibilities can run the gamut. So that could be great KPIs, key performance indicators that you can also include in your financials instead of doing that manually or offline. And what we did when we shaped this Prospero product, released to the world about 15 years ago, we took the best things of the Microsoft stack products, which was ease of use, low cost, interchangeable rows, columns, and trees. And this slide just speaks to that, meaning we're not an Excel add-in. I personally work with several that I do not like and despise. I love Prospero. Its flexibility of reusing rows, columns, and trees, like those 3 building blocks. The first might be there in blue, the row definition or line set for my income statement. I could use that for 100 different reports, including my budget templates. Or secondly, of 3 building blocks, there might be there in red our column definition. I can mix and match that for tons of different reports. And third and finally, we have the infamous reporting trees, which might be your multiple companies and or locations, departments, etc., that you might have within your general ledger to easily consolidate those. And even that data warehouse can consolidate even some acquisition companies or proposed companies you might look to acquire into budgeting, as I'm thinking back of numerous other case points of the flexibility of Prospero we've implemented for our customers. And last but not least, just a little talking point or two that you're going to see today on the budgeting side. So instead of Excel pains, Excel hell it's often called, ta-da, we're going to bring the easy button again to that process to consolidate it. And it has a spreadsheet look and feel, but it's what we call a spreadsheet on steroids because it has the behind the scenes, the one SQL database that's going to store all that data, and it has the instant consolidations within the reporting trees, etc., that I'll be sure to call your attention to. And then also the budgeting within Prospero has all great bells and whistles inside the tool, like we have detail screens for HR, human resources, capital, line item details, revenue, cost of goods sold, audit trail history, just to name a few that you're going to be seeing in today's session if I have ample time based on any questions that do come in. All right, and then of course there's just one little quick slide mainly for the recording of just the pain points in the Excel world. And finally, ta-da, that's where again Prospero alleviates all those pain points and inefficiencies that you had in your reporting and budgeting process. At least this speaks to the budgeting side. And last but not least, mainly for the recording that I'll be sure to share with everybody afterwards. Secondly, including this PowerPoint. And third, be glad to do a little one-on-one demonstration as I see a few little last minute people that came inside the call here. And this is really just several of the Prospero differentiators, almost all I shared in the first couple of minutes as you are considering and shopping around maybe other products for your reporting and budgeting. So there's some, again, recap of that. And what we also did too is I'm going to wrap up with 2 final slides. We sat together with our consultant support team internally, and we reflected on those 15, 20, 30 years of working with customers. What were some common challenges they faced, the column to the left, and then Prospero solutions that we build inside the application. Just to name a couple of these, like line number 1, the old legacy product specialists I refer to Microsoft FRX Forecast Management Porter no longer be supported, even though we do, or Service Pack. And really, Prospero has tons of new features releases, and even today's phone call, I'll probably share about 10 to 15 of those great new features. Item number 4, it used to be 2 historic applications, what we call double the work and applications, but now one cohesive tool, Prospero, that does both reporting, budgeting, and data warehousing. And item number 5, I want to call your attention to a key word there on what we call summary accounts and expanding those, because one of the most painful challenges was whenever you add a new revenue expense account, it was very painful and error prone. We had to go back to many different reports, row definitions, and budget templates, and usually manually add that new account or hopefully not forget to. And within Prospero, we've solved that challenge and fixed that problem with what we call summary accounts like total expenses and expanding those. So I'll be sure to show you that when time comes today. And item 6, personally fond of, because in the Microsoft era, especially the old FRX reporting product, there used to be a few different outputs directly, like directly to the viewer or directly to the printer Excel. But when Microsoft then moved to Managed Reporter, they yanked those away. Customers and us staff kicked and screamed, like, don't do that, don't take features away. So we brought many of those back inside Prospero that Microsoft took away when maybe moving to Managed Reporter, and including the different outputs like PDF, report collections, and publish reports, some little buzzwords that you'll see in today's presentation. And last but not least, these are maybe some last of items 7 through 12 of common pain points, graphing, item 7, or statistics, number 10, including the data warehouse, and also item number 12. Just to repeat, Prospero usually see about half or a third of our cost of our competitors due to its ease of use, maybe due to the conversion of your existing FRX and Manager Porters reports we can bring in automatically into Manager Porter, and also the services, meaning the setup training side, is minimal for its ease of use and familiar look and feel. All right, well, thanks for that little overview. That was primarily about half of our audience today that was new and blue to the Prospero application, so thanks for that overview. And now, within the last 50 minutes, 50 minutes, we are now going to look at the Prospero application. Let me begin by discussing quickly 2 ways commonly you could install or deploy Prospero. One is it could be installed on your servers, what we call on-premise, or what we're looking at currently is we can host that for you, oftentimes called a hosted or cloud application. The functionality and look and feel, either if we install it on your servers or if we host it, the cloud version is identical, so there's no lost functionality or ease of use either way. It's going to be identical. And I've already logged into the tool. And speaking of logging in, we can leverage and use your Windows network authentication, which your IT team's going to love hearing. That means you don't have to really set up and maintain separate user IDs and passwords. It's more secure. And today's presentation, usually I'm going to role play 2 different audience members within your organization. The first might be a power user, usually someone like most of the attendees today, that might be in the finance and accounting area. Or secondly, I'm going to call it an end user, like one of your managers, CFO, board of directors, who might more simply look at a report, or they might also do budget input, being sort of some key functionality of our user types and what they might do within the application. And I usually like starting with the latter of my 2 users I just quoted, that being a manager or end user. So I'm going to call myself Bob, let's say one of your managers within your organization. And when I log into Prospero securely, either on your servers, on premises, or cloud hosted, whenever I launch Prospero, it usually takes me to this nice quick launch landing page. Because we have shortcuts, headed reports and charts, and let's say every month you provide me, you being the administrator in the finance and accounting area, you provide me, the manager, 2 reports every month or week or day. Report 1 to the left, actual versus budget, or here to the right, a nice little rolling 12-month trend. You can obviously provide them more reports as you wish. Or secondly, this heading input, that just means, yeah, I do have the budget ability, or maybe not, based on your wishes and user types that you have. I'm going to get to the budget input side secondly, but let me start with report number 1, my actual versus budget report. And when I open it up, I want to acquaint you briefly with our demonstration structure. We have multiple companies, locations, and departments, including accounts like revenue, expense, and balance sheet. You don't see accounts because they're usually contained in the row definition or line set. Now, speaking of company, let's take a look briefly. This end user, I'm going to call myself Bob, has access to only company number 1, our United States company. But in reality, we have multiple company in consolidation that Prospero's automatically doing for us. And we can limit that based on user, what we call their assignments. Secondly, we have location. Similar story. We have dozens of locations, but this Bob end user only has access to my Denver location. And finally, departments. As we look at our different departments, when I use this little pop-up Zoom window, let me show you briefly 2 ways that you can see any one of these segments, like department, location, etc. One is a list, and for my single Denver location, yes, I have access to all departments. Or instead of a list view, when I'm choosing a segment or companies of your general ledger, I just turn on this lower check mark here to see a selection tree. And we're going to see at least 2 or 3 examples of trees today. This first being on the department. And one great new feature, many inside Prospero versus Microsoft legacy world, and a lot of our competitors too, is this tree called all. It is automatically created and maintained. So as new departments, locations, products, whatever you have as your general ledger segments, that's automatically built and maintained, which again avoids a lot of manual maintenance and human error oversight. So really, I'm just going to look at my financial report for my one location, Denver, looking at all locations. And now what I'm going to do in the next maybe 3 or 4 minutes is I'm going to quote unquote interact with this report. And really what I'm referring to are different drill icons here that I'm going to go from the left to the right on, starting with drilling down to the account and transaction level and changing the drill order of the report very easily and nimbly for slicing and dicing without having to go to a second or third or fourth report. We're also going to look at this report graphically and even drill into the graph. Further to the right, I'm going to drill into line 1, my revenue, or a second line expenses, which I normally do, but I also can see all my report detail on one page if I so choose. I'm going to come here. I might change the prompt. Right now I'm looking at all departments or maybe a Denver location, but this allows me to change from different location departments based on my security access. And lastly, I'm going to add some nice little annotations. How about you, my boss, of the dozens of people we have in this phone call? Let's pretend you're my boss in the finance and accounting area. And I want to explain maybe some variances actual to budget. And last but not least, I'm going to also share with you easy ways to export report to Excel, PDF, printed copy to maybe further share or consume or analyze that data within. All right, of those maybe 5 or so bullet points, let me circle back to each here. The first being drill down to the account and transaction level and changing the drill order. I'm going to take this sales line, secondly maybe an expense down below, and also want to call your attention to the different columns we have, like actual, prior year, budgets, variances, etc. Because when I drill into the sales line, I'm really double clicking anywhere on that line. What it does is it opens up a tab. I went here to the left where I began. Here's the tab to the right where I'm seeing that data. And I could easily resize these windows. I can show them horizontally or vertically. And I'm going to briefly just show you these vertically because, hey, I can multitask, because in the old legacy products and most of our competition, you have to go to separate windows, separate screens where it's very clunky. And I just made that very nimble. And I'm just going to move it back to where it was. I'm going to call this the tab to the left, my original report, or I'll call it the tab to the right, my account level detail when I drilled into my revenue or sales that the heading implies. Now also be aware of a great feature that most of our competition does not have is when I drill into this account level detail, I'm about ready to go to transaction level, I see that data across actual, prior year, budget, and variances, because most of our competition, you would only see a single cell of detail, which I despise on these very costly competitor products. They don't have really barely the functionality, ease of use like we do. And this is what I'm going to call the second level. Level 1, we'll call the financial level. This tab to the right, we'll call it level 2, the account level. And I'm going to drill into the third tab to the right, the transaction level. So here's really transaction 1, 2, 3, 4. Also, a lot of times I'll have vendor or customer information displayed here, but we've grayed that out because we're sort of using a mock-up of our own internal data partially for this demonstration. And then at my fingertips, I do not have to have access to my general ledger to see this transaction detail. I just have to have access to Prospero, usually. But if not, you also can send them this report data to some unsecure offline means like Excel, PDF, etc. And let me actually transition to that in just a moment, those other output options. But before I forget, I want to show you 2 additional things of, let's say, my 5 original bullet points. One is, as I just closed out those tabs, got back to my original level, I drilled into sales like I'm really repeating. I'm going to close that out. I'm going to drill into expenses line, or I could go to the transactions also. But really, I just went to 2 separate screens for revenue and expense, which is my more common path of analysis. But I just want to show you briefly this button here called the full account detail. And that really is just going to show all lines of detail like revenue, cost of goods sold, expenses on one screen or one page. As I just scroll down, there's all my detail in one screen. Maybe it's for my auditor, or maybe I want to come up here and export this to Excel. And here's where I'm going to transition briefly to talking about a few different output types. So I'm just going to accept the default file name and path. And really I'm exporting the screen you see there in the background. It could either be when I drilled in or even subtotaled my report. Maybe I'd also looked at a graph, but this is really one report and only one tab that I was last viewing inside the application. So this is my first example of a couple. And to save a little time, I have a couple other files I've already exported out. The second example would be, let's call it again, one report, meaning an income statement, but notice the different worksheets or tabs here. Here is Miami Service Department, or Miami Operations, or Location 2, Department A, Location 2, San Francisco, Department B, maybe Sales. All right, so again, this might be a very common wish and capability within Prospero to take one report income statement out by the different companies, location, departments that you might have. And again, this might be for a non-licensed Prospero user, but usually we encourage for audit, Sarbanes-Oxley audit controls, to have them be a licensed and more secure user. And last Excel example I'll conclude with is looking at multiple reports. We call this a report collection. So let's role play. A goal of mine is every single week or month that I produce financials to my management team, banker, or board of directors. And I have 3 reports for this example. Report or sheet number 1 for income statement. Here's report or sheet number 2 for balance sheet, or report or sheet 3 for a cash flow. This is simply a report collection. We could easily run all in one fell swoop. We're looking at that being output to the Excel, or I could also output this to a PDF file. And to save a little time, here might be that same one I'm going to call report package or report collection. It's known inside Prospero. And I'm just going to scroll down. There's maybe report 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So most people are doing that manually or offline, but we can automate those steps within Prospero. And briefly, I like to show you the ease of use behind the scenes. And I'm going to log in as my administrator user. We're going to look at that same report collection. And basically, we have here report 1, 2, 3, or 4. I can come up here and add another report. And actually, I got a little message saying I have it open on another screen since I have about 3 sessions open in this demonstration database. But I'm just opening up a second different report collection. Might be different reports for a different audience. And I can come up here. You see report 1, 2, and 3. And clicking on the add button, I'm just going to come up here and add a 4th report, either reports grouped by folder or not, as I turn on that little toggle switch. All right, I just added a 4th report on this. And then last but not least, on the output tab, here is where we looked at the output to Excel or PDF or printer. We also have what are called published reports, because my manager, when they logged in, which I'm going to go back to, they're looking at what we call published reports, which is just a nice little archived area within the application that you can easily store historical reports. And last but not least, I want to show you the workspace. And I think I just bounced from one phone call to a next here. So I'm really just going to do one thing real quickly here. You see the 4 different reports here. And really what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and size all of these reports side by side. And let me just come up here like we saw vertically or horizontally. And let's call this my little dashboard of reports here. And right before this phone call, I was having another client call, and I just showed him this, so I was playing or tampering with this. But let's now say I'm the CFO. Every morning I like to log in, seeing this report collection. And this is really a 3rd example. We saw, first of all, in Excel, as I recap, and why not a quick visual to that, especially for a recording. We looked at 3 examples here to report collection in Excel. Report 1, 2, or 3, I'll call it, as you see the different worksheets. Or the second example we saw was in the PDF, as I scroll down to report 1, 2, 3, 4. And lastly, we're basically looking at what we call this report collection inside Prospero, meaning the viewer. Like here might be a graph trend, and I'm going to transition to graphs here in just a moment and expand that, and even drill into these graphs and change the drill order, which is one of my favorite features. All right, so I'm probably just going to wrap up, but there's basically that same report collection seeing inside the workspace or viewer, often called. And transitioning to the next bullet point, graphing, we have out of the box, meaning you don't have to be an Excel guru of graphs, which I think I'm a very good Excel person, but I don't like graphs, nor a lot of times our competition story would be, you have to know and have an IT person and use Power BI. You have to buy a separate license for that. That's not our story. Our story and ease of use is this little display as chart. It's contained within the product with no extra cost or fee. And I'm looking at this report in several different graph types. And even I can drill into this graph. So I'm just going to drill in. I'm going to call that graph number 1, my financial level. Maybe I'm looking at actual prior year and budget. I'm going to call that my margin analysis. And then really I just drilled in. And speaking of this drilled in graph, I even can switch from the graph view using this icon in the toolbar. I can switch back to the report view. So basically here's my graphical, and when I drilled in to maybe see it by location, product, customer, you name it, based on your general ledger segments. And then here is that same drill downable graph, but looking at what we call the report view or tabular view. So I can easily bounce back between graph and tabular view of that data without having to jump through a bunch of hoops. And behind the scenes, no, I'm not a sales or marketing guy. So if you do consider other products there, be sure to have them show you the odds and ends, because on the chart tab, meaning this is one of my reports that I just demonstrated, we have a chart tab, and all you have to do is say yes or no to allow the chart view. And then here is one of our maybe 8 or so different chart types. That's all you have to do to enable the graphing. No Excel guru, I'm not, nor I don't have to buy some other third-party product or licenses like Power BI or have an IT person managing that for me. By accountants, for accountants is always our buzzwords we use. All right, thanks for that illustration. Checking another thing off my list, and I'm going to wrap up before I get to maybe some other topics like the budgeting side and maybe some more setup, is let's talk about changing the drill order. One of my favorite features for quick analysis of the data. So briefly, I'm bouncing back to my first user, what I'm going to call Bob, that only saw one company, United States, only saw one location, Denver, and they see, yes, the different departments. Like the sales, I drilled in to see maybe department A and B of that single company, US, or single location, Denver. Now, I'm really just going to take that same report now, looking at, though, the eyes of my CFO, meaning when I click on this button here to reopen the report, I just want to emphasize that we're looking at all companies, all location, and all departments. Because when we spoke of trees, here is where I looked at the department, either a list view or I turn on this little check mark to see a tree view. So here's really example 1 of trees, as I'm really just knocking off about 2 or 3 things on my to show you list. I'm also going to show you this location. And speaking of, this is what I'm going to call tree number 1, the all tree. Once again, automatically created and maintained. But maybe a minor disadvantage is it doesn't have any subgroups, because maybe I want to have, here's all my eastern locations like Miami, Atlanta, etc. Or here's my western locations, Seattle, San Francisco, etc. So this is what I'm going to call tree number 1, my default tree. Or here, let's look at the regional tree, because here are some of the east ones here, or here might be some of my west regions, and even we can use ranges and wildcards, which we recommend. That way it reduces and avoids maintenance. But I can still see the best of both worlds, meaning I can see all of my Midwest rolled up, which is maybe all my 4 prefixed. But here in the lower left, I can easily come up here and see these individually. Now, one final thought too within this window, as we're seeing a second tree on location, is this one report, if I had security access, allows me to see across maybe 2 or 3 different trees, because the old way within the Microsoft era And usually most competition is you have to have maybe 3 different reports to use 3 different trees. But nope, within Prospero, you can have one report that does that. And the footnote again is based on my security access, because I may or may not have access to these additional roll-up levels or trees. All right, and long story short, I'm going to conclude with the CFO view and one of my favorite features, what we call changing the draw order. So really, I'm looking at all companies, all locations, and all departments. So now when I drill into sales, a little bit different is, and it looks like I was playing around, I need to change the drill order. I'm going to come back here and let me clarify that click here, because I did it a little quick. I came here in the change the drill order. Usually I predefine this, and maybe someone played around that I was not aware of. Let's say I usually want to look at company first or location secondly when I drill in. And I'm going to take you back to the report in just a second. I'm going to change or define that default drill order. But you can see I can also change it on the fly. So really, I'm just going to come up here and do it by company and location first, but then my final example, I'm going to analyze this data maybe departmentally as my first slice or click. But right now, I just defined it as company first. So now when I drill in to sales or any other line in my report, there's level number 1 by company. Or here is now level number 2 by location. Or here maybe level number 3, really the lowest level before I get to the transaction. And we call this the account level detail. And I could have gone one extra click to the transaction level, but I'm not. Now, I do not have to go to a second or third report like historically or competition. I'm now going to change the drill order, but how about I want to look and analyze by department, who's good or bad, like these variances. So I just drag department to the top. And now, instead of department, let's say being my third layer or click, now it is my first. So I'm now seeing all this data, especially variances by who's good or who's bad. I see a problem child marketing with a large variance, and let me wrap up by reopening the report and looking just at that department 300 that we see there in the background for marketing. So here is where I can found easily good or bad areas. I didn't have to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes looking at a bunch of different reports. So awesome ability to change the drill order. And I'm really just going to recap. Usually I have the little trainer hat on me. Change the drill order. I can just drag and drop these as needed, meaning on the fly. But also I quoted, I can predefine those. So looking back at the report level, like where we define a line and column, I'm going to look brief at the options tab. I'm going to put this back to where it usually is, meaning company first, location, maybe department. Maybe this is my preferred or default order. That never gets changed, but users on the fly can change the drill order based on their security access and analysis needs. All right, thank you for that. One little note I made that I really just want to emphasize is those people considering Prospero. We love the row, column, or tree, meaning on the home ribbon, I'm logged in as the power user in finance and accounting. I'm going to look to this catalog view so I can see within the entire system all my items here. So here are all the different reports by line, column. Looking here to the right, who last modified it, created it, last use, etc. We even have more detailed audit trail history, who changed what in the system. But I'm going to conclude with saying, nope, I love Prospero, meaning the reusable lines, columns, etc. Because here I just click on the heading for lines, and really I'm sorting every report by the line set being used. So here is that very first slide in PowerPoint that I mentioned. We have these reusable rows, meaning again, we're not Excel out add-in product, because those are very painful. Because let's say management asks me, the finance person, to make a change to this report. Maybe they want me to add a non-recurring line to this income statement. I do not have to go to 10 different Excel files to update. I just go to the one line set or row definition to update it. Versus our Excel competition, it might look like something like this, which this is not Prospero, but this is mainly our Excel competition. You would see all this. You'd see not who last modified it, used and when. And let's say these three reports use the same structure. I'd usually have to open up all three separately to make that structural change, which thankfully, again, Prospero is not an Excel add-in. Hallelujah. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox, but I'm personally fond and work with other products these days after these 30 years. All right. Let me see. Let's talk about budgets for a few minutes, and then I'm going to conclude with a few little setup items to again show its ease of use. Now, speaking of budget, I'm logged back as my manager, Bob. I'm looking at variances last month or year to date, actual versus budget. I'm going to take one step back because when I logged into Prospero securely, either on your servers or the hosted cloud version, looks the same either way. I looked at report number 1, or I could look at report 2, 3, or 4 you gave me access to. We call that report visibility. Now, I do have access, and it might be that time of year that you want me to do some budget input. So I'm now going to open up this budget. Might be next year's budget for fiscal 26, or maybe it's a new quarterly forecast. And long story short, I'm really just emphasizing and repeating that we have the same reusable lines and row definition. So I'm really opening up Department A of my one Denver location. Or I could open up a second department, third, fourth, and fifth, and usually they would maybe all use the same line set. Let's say you have 100 different departments. Again, it could use the same single line set, which means the setup and maintenance were not Excel. Those are all the advantages of using a purpose-built Prospero budgeting tool. And I'm not going to open up a second, third, or fourth department that looks and feels the same, but maybe I have one of my departments that does have sales and cost of goods sold, but maybe the other 9 departments of the 10 that I have access to, I'm opening up maybe that 10th department that looks and feels a little bit differently. And this might be my different department where I want to budget using a different line or row definition. So this one, unlike the one that you see in the background that has expenses only, this one now that just rendered has sales, cost of goods sold, etc. Now, speaking of Prospero, I mentioned the data warehouse to include some statistics that might not be in your general ledger, actual or budget, units sold, headcount, price, etc. Now, additionally, there might be other segments or data also not in your general ledger. And I'm going to show you 2 additional examples, or 3 here. One of those 3 is products like 10 for motors or product 20 compressors. Those are not in my general ledger, but we can also easily include those actual budget inside Prospero. Or a second example of 3 is these units sold or price, meaning revenue price or cost price. These statistics are not in my general ledger, but easily I can include those. And third and finally, we're going to look at maybe down the employee level. Before I look at the employee level, meaning HR detail, which is one of the largest costs of organization, I'm just going to quickly come up here. I'm changing this value from 14,000 to 15,000, and I'm copying that to the right, and I'm going to quickly save this. Easy, enter, copy and paste, Excel keystroke, and look and feel. But maybe 8 or 9 different cool things in my budget screen. One of those is audit trail history. So I'm going to click on this button here. We're going to look at some other icons briefly in the toolbar. So here's me on today's date, meaning July 30th. I'm logged in as Bob, Manager 1, but here would be Derek Krebs or whatever user truly. And it says, yep, they change it from this value to this value. And I'm only looking at maybe one account here. This is my unit sold account. And this is maybe one example of 3. I'm looking granularly at one department and one account. But what I'm going to do is this time, I'm not going to put my cursor on unit sold, meaning not a specific line or account. And I'm going to look at history. But once again, this now is history of multiple accounts. So here I'm going to expand the account that I played with, meaning my unit sold, as I changed that today. But I'm going to come up here and collapse, and I can do some other searches. I can do even searches like the username, manager 1, and you see probably it collapsed. It used to be larger, which I'm going to remove that. More lines got added or removed here. So I have a lot of little filters by date and time. I can easily see who changed those values and when. Great audit trail history. All right, I'm probably going to wrap up of my revenue cost of goods sold department, but again, this was using a different line set or row definition usually. Maybe the other 9 of my expense departments use the same one, which I'm going to bounce back to one of my expense departments. Now, really color coding. You can use any colors you wish, like yellow here in heading is what department or location I'm in. Maybe gray I like to use for items you do not enter directly into. Or maybe rose and white, yes you do. And let me even start with the latter, meaning here is where the row in white units I changed from 14 to 15,000 in the first couple of months here as my first example of easy edits. But I'm going to come back to my budget screen and let me show you some other cool things where let's now role play. I'm in the marketing department. I have this one account, $73.50 for advertising, which one is my largest expenses outside of payroll. And I can easily come up here and insert line item detail. Why not? I'll even add a new line here. So let's say here I'm going to have a summer camp here. And I want to budget separately for that. So how about here in August, I want to work in my tan and swimming. So I'm going to budget $10,000 for this summer camp. And here you see the plus icon to the left, those items with line item detail, and in the toolbar, I'm now going to conclude. Speaking of line items, I'm now going to expand. As you see in green, whatever color you wish, those budgeted items that have detail, or I'm going to collapse, and even I can come up here and again, insert line items, maybe for lines that do not have initially detail. Last couple of bullet points. I'm also monitoring the queue here. I think 2 or 3 questions I see came through the queue. I've already answered 2 of those. I'll try to get that 3rd question here in just a minute. But on the budgeting side, these little blue icons indicate memos or notes here. I can hover on top of those to read those memo or notes. As you see me hovering on top of those, or better yet, on the toolbar, I'm going to click on this icon called Show the Annotations column, because looking here to the right, I can see who, meaning what user, when, a time date stamp, added what budget memos or notes here. And I'm going to call these my forward-looking notes. Now in contrast, even though I didn't demonstrate it, here is my original report. Let's call it my last month action versus budget. We have the same type of memos or notes here. And even I'm going to add a memo or note to the sales line. I'm going to right-click anywhere for annotate. I'll just be short and sweet. I'll say thanks. Here's my variance, whatever it might be. And once I click OK, there's the memo or note. And let me conclude with talking about here to the right, we have our annotations that I'm going to thumbtack to not auto hide. So here's who, meaning manager 1 on this date and time, add that memo or note. So maybe I'm explaining my variance in this fashion, excusing my typo there. All right, so maybe this is my historical note when I'm maybe describing you, my boss, action or budget report, or as I go back and conclude with the memo or note overview, here is on the forward-looking budgeting side, those memo or notes or line item detail. And finally, there's probably a lot more I would love to share with you, but there's a few other cool things in the last 15 or so minutes I want to share with you. On the budget side, we looked earlier at revenue cost of goods sold on that other department, but let's now turn our attention to salaries and wages, including benefits. So here is, in our general ledger, we have 2 different expense accounts for wages, if you're exempt or non-exempt, including bonuses, overtime, commissions, which means, yeah, Prospero has cool ability for any needs such that you have. Here's statistics, like headcount hours. These are budgeted columns, but I could also have some prior year data. And then lastly, here are maybe my related benefits, like common ones for health insurance. This line here is my payroll tax. And notice that it starts high, some of the payroll tax, and then it starts to taper off because here are where employees reach certain threshold of limits. And then I'm going to click on this tab called Human Resources. Since I have access, maybe I don't, maybe this tab is not seen or available at all. Or if I do have access to this tab, which you can define yes or no, maybe it's read only or edit, or I can edit it. Really the 2 main choices, either I see the tab or not, or I can edit it or not within this window based on your easy choices of yes or no on the user. And let's look briefly at a couple of key fields here. Really, these are the different names like Bob, Sally, or Jane, or position, that I might have, because here might be support reps. We have great seniority. People don't leave our company, but let's say I have high turnover in a certain area. I might budget people more by aggregate, meaning here's 5 different people making an average rate. Now, speaking of the flexibility within Prospero, here's a couple of columns that visually were cues for you. I could either it by salary or hourly people, the larger or smaller dollar, by hours or FTE full-time equivalency. And I'm really just going to come up here in the toolbar, especially this column I'm on currently. I want to show maybe everybody full-time equivalents, or I want to show everybody in hours, or what mixed means might be in this one department. I might have hourly and salary people. And that's really just what we mean by mixed. And really, I'm going to take one step back. I don't have to toggle because here are those statistics all nicely summarized on my original screen. This is my budget screen, and even I can have a report that does this nicely, especially rolled up by aggregate, because I'm only looking at one department currently, just to clarify. And let's go back to the Human Resources tab. These are really just nice to haves. You're not required to use it. A couple of those fields, as I go further from the left to the right, might be when they start and end. Like this person at the very top works the entire year, like period 1 to 12, or here, maybe they start mid-year, like in period 6. And instead of 2 columns, like column 1 when they start or column 2 when they end, I even can break this out by month or period, especially if I have any seasonality, because maybe the summer camp, I have some summer interns, or maybe I'm a retail person, maybe the Christmas months, winter months, I want to break it out further by month so we can easily expand this by the different months of the year, or periods, if you have different periods than months. And lastly, continue to the right, let's look at a person that gets a pay raise. So this person starts making $25,000. They get a 10% raise in period 3. So that's the $27,000 afterwards. Okay. And then additionally, I can do bonuses by either dollar or percent. And if the bonus period is left blank, that just means the bonus gets accrued for the different months they work in. Like the bottom line, working from period 6 to 12, they get a 10% each of those months, period 6 through 12. But the top line is oftentimes maybe I want to get more granular and specific of when they get these bonuses. Again, you don't have to define that. Nice to have as you see bonus periods blank or defined. And further to the right, just in the summary, we have maybe some overtime fields for any hourly people, commission, let's say for salespeople, and benefits. And even I'm going to use MSX Group as an example. We have employees in about 10 different states. Derek, I live out in California. So maybe when I get loaded inside the system, like once a year, a quarter based on your budget frequency, it does not matter what payroll system you're using. I would just simply import. Let's call it the 100 people at MSX Group I want to budget for. I would just simply have a file, Excel, that I might load once a year, once a quarter, that has their name, department, how much they make, along with maybe what state they're in. Now, speaking of these benefits, you as the client, you define what the column headings are. You as the client defines what these choices are. Like for states, here's maybe the different states we operate in. Therefore, it might be different payroll tax rates. Or secondly, for health insurance. Maybe I don't use this field. Maybe everybody gets a flat $500 per month they work. But maybe you, the client, defines, I want to have a choice A, B, and C. It might be single family, it might be HMO, high deductible, PPO, preferred plan, etc. And other common fields might be workers' comp, cell phone, yes or no, 401k, X, Y, or Z percent. But you again define that. Now notice in this screen, very key if you're considering another product, we have no formulas inside the system, but all of our Excel competition, be sure to have them show you, because usually behind the scenes, they have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of formulas. Usually they don't want to show you because they really revert back to the Excel hell that our product does not have. Our product simply has one table where you define these choices, no formulas. All right. And really, I'm just going full circle now. Here's all my large cost rolled up, meaning gray locked from input. And then here is where I can detail out if I wish, including my statistics, headcount, hours, FTE, and related benefits. And on the capital tab, here might be some new acquisitions of capital, I'm just going to come up here and insert or budget a new item here. I'm just going to call this demo, and really this capital type pick list, you, the client, being the recurring theme for ease of use and setup, really you define this list, and we see here in the background, in this reference list, really this capital type list you define, any IDs and names will define three things. The balance sheet account, which we have the 17 prefix in our demonstration database for those. It'll define the depreciation expense account you see in this column, and third, the life and months for those. You can say what month you place that in, because you see some different purchase dates here in the background. The count, like on this top line, I'm budgeting now 4 items at $5,000 each, which is a total cost of $20,000. And let me go full circle back to this main tab. And toward the bottom, here is my new capital. Here's the related depreciation to those new capital types. And usually if we have a little one-on-one demonstration, I can easily show you a balance sheet screen that I might want to do for my entire company in aggregate, because more this is a profit and loss income statement example that we're going to focus on for the budgetability, but definitely balance sheet and cash flow is very common these days, as I'm thinking of the 30 years and hundreds of customers I've done this with. All right, I'm sure there might be an item or two I forgot, so sorry, Prospero, for maybe forgetting any awesome budget features. And let me wrap up with some other cool final remarks of pain points I led in with. And to help me with that, I'm going to log back in as my power user, looking at this income statement, because one of the painful things was or is if you ever add a new revenue expense to your chart of accounts. The old way was you had to go back to all your different rows, reports, not only your reporting tool, but your budgeting tool, and usually have to manually add that new account. Painful, error prone. Now in Prospero, we're going to look at 2 examples. For revenue, we see a total revenue and maybe 3 or 4 revenue accounts up above. Or for expenses, we see this one total. We call that a summary account, and above, we're showing the different expense groupings or individual accounts based on your wishes. And really, I'm going to come here, since I'm a power user, I'm going to go to the line setter column of the screen. Let's go to the line definition. And here's the old bad way, meaning for revenue, which is a total. The old bad way is individual list accounts, because maybe I have a new revenue account 4903. I would come up here and have to insert a line in an account. That was the old bad way. The new good way is for expenses. We only have one line here. And here is my third and final example to trees. We first of all saw trees on department. Second, we saw locations on, trees on location, like that one report, where based on my security access, I could look at tree 1, 2, or 3 for my analysis based on my security. And third example, final example of trees is on the account segment. So here's my natural account and the same little toggles, meaning I could see individual accounts. I'm really just scrolling up. There's all my individual numerical accounts, but here is maybe a tree on accounts. Most companies only need one tree that rolls up both balance sheet and income statement accounts, but let's just focus on this income statement tree only. You give it whatever name you want, like I call this GRPF for gross profit, or I call this COGS for COGS, et cetera, et cetera. Now here, you have a lot of flexibility to use ranges, wildcards, and even subgroups, because cost of goods sold, maybe I want to break down to 3 different levels here. This might be labor, material, and overhead. And again, it might be individual accounts or ranges beneath. And last but not least, let me conclude with showing you the expenses, because here in the background, let me repeat, this is a summary account. We gave it any name like EXPN. We see it's account 6,000 to 7,999. We're expanding above to show the detail. And what 0 means, it means show me every individual account within this range, at least for the department I'm looking at, because usually we turn on a little switch, yes or no, whether or not to show lines with balances in our report or our budget screen. Usually we suppress and only show accounts that have balances. And another example is in the level, instead of 0, that means show me every individual account. If I were to have cost of goods sold being my summary account that I'm using, if I typed in one level down, what would it do? Then it would show this one level down. If I wish, because this might be expenses, maybe I have 10 different expense subgroups like wages, travel accounts, communications like cell phone, utilities, etc. So a lot of flexibility of how you structure this account tree based on really reporting groupings. As at least here's one example that you can maybe interpret and correlate based on your reports. But good news again is you usually only have one master tree, and I usually conclude this tutorial on trees on the account segment with let's looking at that behind the scenes. Since I'm a power user, I'm just going to right click and expand or collapse the entire tree. I'm going to expand it all. We're looking at expenses in the line set. And a very cool thing is I can see what are missing or orphaning accounts, because one example here I'm going to do is this account 7800. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to delete that account. I'm going to right click insert because the system does great checks and balances. Maybe 3 I'm going to wrap up within the next 1 minute. When I insert, especially the 78 prefix accounts or expenses in general, here my expenses begin with a 7. I quickly see the orphan account. There's one great checks and balances. So I'm really going to put that account back. The second example is I can also use a range. Like here's range 1, or we see range number 2, where we saw a range earlier with the wild card in this. So I'm just going to call it demo, and I'm just going to call it expenses. And I could do expenses in one of 2 ways. The range you currently see me doing, where 4 characters here, 4 characters here, or based on your chart of account length, or I could use a wild card. I'm lazy. I'm only liking 2 digits instead of maybe the 4 digit here and 4 digit here. And now if I click OK, oops, there's my other second great checks and balances we built in ahead of time to avoid duplicates. So we saw the missing or orphans earlier. Now here's a great way to avoid any duplicates we have in the system. And last thing, even though there's many more cool things that we built inside the tool, I'm going to right click, and for this expenses, I want to right click and I want to see where that's used throughout the entire system. Let me expand this window a little bit for us, because hey, this one expenses, it's using all these different line sets. It's using this one tree, it's using this one column. So if I change my mind, I do not have to go to all these Excel files, which were again not an Excel add-in, which we do in our competition have to, nor we don't have to go to all these separate line sets. I make my change in one spot and then it flows downward. So that's what we always encourage our clients to leverage and use these account trees to reduce and avoid all your report or budget maintenance in years past that were painful. All right, thank you. I know there's probably a few things I did not get a chance to do, so what I'll do is some nice little concluding remarks of a big thank you for everybody that attended live. I think I'm looking back at the question queue or looking at the recording later. I think I got to all the questions. If I missed any, which I think I did 1 or 2, I'm going to maybe follow up with you individually because I might need some clarifying thing on that. And if you want to see a one-on-one demonstration, my name again is Derek Krebs. Here's my email contact information. And also for any prospective customers that are not current ones, if you want to see a nice little one-on-one demonstration or even a free trial, reach out to me and I can definitely route you through your account manager and assist with that. All right, well, have a great rest of your day. Happy reporting and budgeting. Hope you found some nice little tools, tips, and tricks. Reach out anytime and have a great day. Goodbye, everybody.